comes from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living.
I'm Dr. Mike Costello, and I'm here with the Reverend Iris Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about spiritual psychic science. In our belief, the spiritual psychic aspect is very important to us because it connects us with that which is divine, and it gives us a dimension of spirituality that is very focal and important to our religious movement. Reverend Freelander, you have a spiritual psychic counselor that you see. Maria?
Yes, I do. Maria Moreno is a wonderful medium, and she goes out of her body, and one person comes through and is like her gatekeeper, and Chloe DeHaan is her name, and so she takes over, and Maria is not there anymore, or her consciousness is not there. Now, the way I understand it, and I've never acted as a medium, I've never been a medium, but sometimes they just stay as a part of their own consciousness, and they see what's happening as the person comes through and talks to that client, whoever that might be. And then sometimes they go off into other dimensions, and they're not even there. And I recently reread Arthur Ford's 2 books, and that's what he did sometimes. He would go off and study and do whatever he wanted to on the inner, while Fletcher used his body to talk with the clients and with people who needed the help. And but Maria Moreno is a psychic medium, and as a psychic medium, the etheric body is pulled down, and it's clairvoyantly seen. It's like a hood around the shoulders, and then the entity comes through and speaks. And if the medium is very wise, they pray for protection, and they pray that they will that those only high entities on the inner will come through them, and they are protected. They don't have to worry about just anyone from the lower astral coming in and using their bodies. And I believe if they don't ask for that protection, then it does happen, that their bodies can be used by multiple ones.
And that's a very important differentiation that we need to make between a spiritual psychic or an individual who is a psychic medium bringing forth spiritual truth on the level of spirit. And usually these people are very religious, very spiritual, very centered in the presence of God, as opposed to those who simply tell the future or give psychic readings.
That is correct. And Maria Moreno is a very good example of that, because she was a very staunch Catholic as she grew up, and all her life she's respected her Catholicism, but she's also a Christian mystic, and she studied the wisdom of the ages and the ancient wisdom, and incorporates that into her thinking. But so she's a very wonderful human being in her own right, but she does such wonderful work in helping others, and she's so selfless in her help. Now she's in her late 80s, and she's been doing this since she was 10 years old. The first time I went to Maria, I had read a book written by Jess Stern, A Matter of Immortality. And that book was about Maria's work at various times, through a specific amount of time. And certain people who had been movie stars came through her, and certain others who had not had a high profile in this life. But the book was about various types of people. And when I read that book, I thought, I must meet this lady. So I wrote Jess Stern a letter and got an answer back, and therefore was able to see Maria. But I wrote to thank him for that, and my letter came back undeliverable, and I had written it to the very same address. So I think it was fate that I was necessarily supposed to see Maria and to know her. And she's helped me a great deal, not with telling me what to do and how to live my life, but confirming for me things I thought were true and felt to be true, and things I received in my meditation times, that it's confirmation. And that's what we're all looking for, affirmation and confirmation. And if we're looking for someone to tell us how to live, then we're looking in the wrong direction, because we need to make our own decisions and get our own life in order. But those people can help us a great deal if they're honest and reliable, and many are. Maria has had people from all over the world come to her, and still does. And she lives a very modest life. For many years, she charged $3 a reading for readings. Now she won't take more than 25. And she says, and I told her just recently, Maria, I always feel so that you should have much more money than $25 for all this time and help. And she says, the masters tell me that's plenty. And she gives that to charity, I think.
And she's very centered in her spiritual truth, and everything that she brings forth comes from the planes of divine light.
Right, that's correct. And she gets up at 4 and 5 in the morning and on nice days, and these last few rainy days she wouldn't have, and works in her garden. And she's very in touch with life as it is. And she's not like way out in space all the time. She's a very balanced human being. And there's not very many mediums, I think, who are able to maintain that balance, because it's really hard for them to maintain a balance after they've once been a medium for a time. And you know, one reason for that is because their etheric body gets holes in it if they're not very handled carefully with those on the inner who are working with them. And if they allow just all and sundry to come through them, then their etheric body gets whole like formations, and they're not balanced, because it's our etheric body that governs our physical body. And when our physical body is strong, then our etheric body is very strong and whole. And then when it's not, and also you can see by the color of that etheric body, when someone is healthy and strong, it has a rosy glow, and when they're not, it has a gray look, which just means that there's a very definite physical difference in it. So Maria is one medium, and there are many, who have maintained a balance in her life and has done a wonderful service to humanity.
And of course, what she's doing is stepping forth from this dimension or this earth plane into the inner, into the spiritual realm, and bringing forth messages or information. And so she's really performing services as a pastoral counselor.
That's right.
And most spiritual mediums are doing exactly that. They're providing pastoral counseling by connecting themselves with those on the inner to bring information to those here on the earth plane.
Yeah.
Very important distinction to keep in mind, that those who are non-spiritual psychics may or may not be accurate, and we're not talking about those individuals. We're talking about spiritual psychic mediums, those who are well-grounded in spiritual truth and who are connecting with those on the inner to bring information. And it is not a process through which people go to necessarily be told what to do, nor is it a process through which people go to be told what's going to happen. It is a process through which the individual can go to the counselor and receive meaningful information and use that information in their lives.
Yes, and I think that we can see the difference in certain ones. You were pointing out that some are very spiritually oriented and some are not. And those who are not will usually charge a great deal of money, and they will work regardless of whether or not they are seeing anything. They pretend, because if they're charging a lot of money, then they pretend and they keep going. And this has happened, and we know that it's happened, but we like to think that it doesn't happen very often. But it's just like a few times Maria has told people have gotten to her home and she's been ready to give a reading, and she'd say, well, I can't do that today. And I think it's because her physical body would be damaged if she did go ahead with it. And her inner teachers are telling her, don't do that today because it wouldn't be good for your physical body. And I know the first time I had a reading with her, they said, we want to explain to you how we work. They said, we are in another dimension, and it's like you can get on the radio, you can get programs from London, from New York, and from many other points. And so when we come in through the medium, we're coming in from these other points. But, and the lady speaking was Clarita Hahn. She says, I'm Clarita Hahn, and I help her in every case. So Clarita Hahn is like the gatekeeper, and then everyone comes through her. And she says what they're saying and she repeats what they're saying to the client. And then, she's like a relay station.
And Maria is a trance medium.
Right. She goes into trance, and then they take over her body and use her body. And one very important aspect of her work is there's a Dr. Jellicoe who comes through her all the time. I've had several readings with Maria, and he's always come through, and he always gives me a physical examination. Now, sometimes he has told me to see a doctor about this or that, and I know when people have less good health than and I've been blessed with fairly good health, he will have them see a specific doctor, a type of doctor, and insist that they go right away. And he did that with Maria one time, and she, sure enough, had a very critical problem, and she had an embolism, I believe it was. It was like an embolism. Had to do with the blood and a blood clot. And if she hadn't gone, she would have died. And she almost died in the hospital. And she had a near-death experience at that time, which was a very lovely experience for her. So Dr. Jellicoe helps, and I had a little lump on my head recently, on the back of my head, and I said, one thing I want to do today is have you check my head because I believe there's a problem there. And actually it was a lump about the size of half of a small egg, which was not a small lump. And he felt it, and he said, but it's an interesting thing, and to feel the lump on my head, he felt Maria's head. He put his hand on her head, and then he could feel my head. It's really strange how that works, but it works that way. And so he said, oh, there's nothing to that. He said, as you get older, you'll find all sorts of things going on in your body. And he said, you can't pay too much attention to those things. Just go right on with your life. And I thought that was very dear because it alleviated my fears. But if it had been something drastic, then he would have said, see a doctor right away. And he would have told me the type of doctor he recommended that I would see.
Mm-hmm. And does Maria sometimes do readings not in trance?
No, she gives spiritual counseling, but she would be so modest that she wouldn't call it that, but I do, because she helps her clients a great deal just by talking to them from her own level of consciousness. And she is quite clairvoyant, and she can see very much into the inner, and also she has guidance from her, which is partly what clairvoyance is. She has guidance from those on the inner who are giving her the help that she needs. But she doesn't remember anything that comes through when she's in trance. Mm-hmm. Now, some psychics do. I know another psychic who remembers everything, or she, as much as you would normally remember. She's aware of everything that happens during her trance. And actually, I think it's nice that the medium doesn't see and know, because it gives the client total anonymity. And if something very personal came up in relation to personal relationships or finances or any other thing that's quite indeed personal, then no, the medium wouldn't know about it. If I were a medium, I would rather work like Maria does and not know what's going on with the clients, because I wouldn't want to know their secrets.
Mm-hmm. And the clairvoyant is then able to see.
Yes.
See beyond the veil.
Right. A clairvoyant sees beyond the veil, and some of us have just a clairvoyance occasionally, and then some are totally clairvoyant at all times, and I wouldn't know about that. I think it would be quite a trial to be clairvoyant at all times, and I would hope that if I were, I could turn it off at will, because it's a very, very grave responsibility to know about other people's lives. And those who are totally clairvoyant, I understand, and certainly those of us who just see from time to time, would never look into another person's life. We would never look to see, unless they ask us, unless we're prompted by our higher entity self to see something and then always say to the person what we've seen. But it's very rude to me to go around, for those psychics who go around telling people, I see this and I see that. I think that's very rude and intrusive in people's lives, and most people do resent it. And most people, that's what makes people afraid of the psychic sciences, those who misuse or don't use their gifts wisely make people afraid instead of being grateful.
Mm-hmm. And so many have gone out of their way in the last few decades and in the last century or two, and going all the way back to the Salem witch trial. A lot of people have been intolerant of the abilities of others to see and to be psychically attuned. And yet in the conventional church, we have a resurgence, even in the fundamentalist churches, of the phenomenon of a word of knowledge, which is the knowledge of or about someone that is shared in a spiritual setting. And so there are a lot of unfounded fears and a lot of negativity about spiritual psychic science.
Yes, and that's unfortunate because, and I think it's because some have misused their talents and have made people fearful. And then it's like we have the Puritan work ethic and we have the Puritan spiritual ethic, and that's so phony because it brought through so much pain and grief in the lives of people. But I think it's probably just their karmic destiny. The ones who were persecuted in this life or in the Salem witch trials or times in between were those who persecuted others, because there's been religious persecution from time immemorial. And there's always been, as we read throughout history, we see where that was true. And so we can look to the life of Jesus, we can look to the time before the life of Jesus, through any of the great teachers who came in to teach us, or the avatars were persecuted by some.
And spiritual psychic science is only one dimension of our spirituality.
Yes.
And so often people believe that that metaphysical thought is just inundated completely with psychic science. And that's not the case at all. It is a dimension of our faith tradition. It is something that some people are more interested in, others are less interested in. And our purpose in discussing spiritual psychic science is to raise the awareness of those who are listening so that they can understand that this is just one aspect of our spirituality, and it is one that can be either embraced or it can be rejected.
Right, and hopefully so they wouldn't be fearful that that these topics are evil or negative in any way, because they're not. They're just natural and normal for those of us who wish to seek them out, the information, or to give further information out, because they're what is, and so truth is. And we know that these things are real because we've seen them manifest in our lives. And when we've seen them manifest in our lives, then we can't deny them. And so those who have not seen them manifest, I believe, are just fearful, and they're pushing it aside because they're fearful.
And you and I have both seen people who are very good and gifted at their mediumship and at their psychic revelations, and those who are just fakes and frauds.
That's right.
And the fact is that there are fakes and frauds in every aspect of life.
Exactly.
It's true in the church, in law, in medicine, in every aspect of life. And just because there are some fakes or charlatans, and just because there are people who misuse the gift or the system, isn't a reason to simply have a negative thought about the entire process. If we remember that Jesus himself handpicked the disciples that he had, the followers, and they continued to fail him in so many ways. And with his insight and ability, if he chose these people, he wasn't choosing them based upon their spiritual knowledge or awareness. He was choosing them simply because they were children of God, and some of them failed him. And in our lives, people will fail us. And we sometimes feel that psychics, readers, or ministers, or seers, or spiritual people should be above that. We would hope that they are, but in truth, there are people who misuse and abuse their power. That's
in
it.
every field of life. And we just have to use our discernment. And that's one thing that meditation helps us to do. When we attune ourselves to God, then it helps us to be more discerning. And we need to be discerning in all walks of life. I heard just one day this week that a young man I know, well, he's young to me, and he's not that young, but he's a judge, and he has Alzheimer's, and he's had Alzheimer's for a time. But he stayed on the bench as a judge up until fairly recently. And so who knows what kind of edicts he gave out because of that. And I know a spiritual teacher who seemed to have had Alzheimer's for a number of years, and she was a wonderful spiritual teacher. And she either had Alzheimer's or some other problem with her body that affected her mind. So who knows how much of her work was created erroneously because of her affliction. But that's why we have to be aware and alert and have our own antenna out and judge for ourselves, and not let other people tell us what's real and what isn't, but be our own judge. Judge everything for ourselves. Keep our own antenna out.
And if we want to seek out a spiritual psychic, medium, or counselor, well, it is our responsibility to discern and to be guided and directed and to be continually vigilant in
Yes.
terms of the quality of the gifts that we're being given, because it is up to us
Yes.
in many ways.
Yes.
And we'll be guided and directed if we open ourselves to the Spirit of God and to the power of knowledge.
Yes, and sometimes we like to just be like the Carillion photography. We like something new and different, and I think that's an exciting aspect. And I know at the psychic science fairs they have the Carillion photographer, and he shows the aura of the person, and then he gives a reading, and it's very interesting. And those things can be fun, and they can be enjoyed just in that light. But we should never expect anyone to make our major decisions for us. We can only ask for guidance and help and then make our own decision. And that's what the greatest of the clairvoyants or mediums would hope that we would do. The truly good ones don't want to make decisions for us.
Where they're not there to tell us.
Right.
They're there to share with us information that we need to make our decisions.
Exactly.
And the other thing that's very important is that when they see things or when they're impressed with things that may come to pass, that is exactly what they're sharing, things that may come to
Yes,
pass.
yes.
And by changing our way of thinking and the dynamic of our life, we can change the outcome, because nothing has happened until it happens.
That's right. And another thing, they're seeing in symbols. They don't give out words. They see symbols and then they interpret the symbols. And again, Arthur Ford's guide Fletcher, who came through Arthur Ford for like 40 years or great number of years, he gave more explanation than any other inner guide in that way. And that's how he explained it. He'd say, I'm seeing the symbols, and he would say what symbols he was seeing, and he means, so he would see the symbols and get a feeling and then give the message. And it wouldn't always necessarily be exactly the way the message was being given from whoever was delivering that message before Fletcher picked it up. Because, but the person, if they had discernment, would know the difference.
And that's the important thing, that the individual needed to have discernment,
Yes.
and that the information was being provided just for them.
Yes.
Many times I've heard spiritual mediums give readings and information, and they'll often say to the individual for whom they're reading, I don't know what this means, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
Yes.
And it'll mean something to you. And that's very true.
And very often that will be the most prophetic or exciting part of the whole reading. Something that the medium thinks is just totally irrelevant is really important to the person. And it could be any number of things, but it would be something that meant something between the person who was the sitter, the person who is having the reading is called the sitter, and the person from the inner planes of being who's giving the message. And it would be something usually trivia, but that would be the most the one that would be the most strongly impressed on the sitter, that this verification, that it would be the strongest verification.
And the verification aspect is very important from the standpoint of verifying the fact that there is a spiritual dimension to our lives. And I think that that is one of the great gifts of psychic science and mediumship, is that it confirms for us, it gives us tangible, demonstrated proof that there is a spiritual realm, and that life is very much the same in the spiritual realm as it is here, but life is different. And going back to Arthur Ford's guide, Fletcher brought so many wonderful truths through in terms of telling what life was like on the other side.
Yes.
And so often we think about psychic science and we think, well, it's going to tell us who we should marry and who we should love and what job we should have and those kinds of things. Well, there are much more important things than those. Those are decisions that we can make on our own. But if we're given true spiritual truth from the inner plane, we really are given a tremendous gift.
Yes. I think it's interesting, too, that you mentioned the writing, automatic writing. More and more people are getting automatic writing. I know several people who have had wonderful results of getting automatic writing come through them. And I've mentioned Susie Ward, whose son died 14 years ago. And he said that they made the plan before either of them came in for this earth life, this incarnation, that they would be the same family, and he would die first, and then they would write the book. And she has a whole book ready now that he gave her in less than a year. That book was finished. And I had a letter from a lady in Nevada who is taping voices in her home, And a couple and 5 young men have taken up residence in her home. I took up residence about a year and a half ago. And recently she wrote me another letter and sent an 8-page transcript of some of the information that's come through her tape unit. And she moved out to a vacation home trailer that she had on Lake Mead. And they were complaining because they didn't have the conveniences there that they had at her home in the city.
Oh.
And they said, for example, there was one woman and her husband, and then the 5 boys are not their children, but they're young men. And one is 17 and the others are younger. And so Margaret said, well, I really liked the rainbow sweeper much better. And she has a rainbow brand sweeper at her home in the city. And then they were complaining because there was no telephone. And there's one named Rick who seems to be the speaker. He's the 17-year-old of the younger ones. So he seems to be the spokesman for them most often. And he said, we must speak to Jackie about getting a phone. She hears me, and I'm going to tell her that we must have a phone. We can't live here without a phone. And I think the man wanted to place his bets in Las Vegas with the phone, the man who was at Discarnate. It's really quite interesting, but she's going to get all the information she can from them and then encourage them to go on into the light and go on with their destiny, because they shouldn't be earthbound like that for a long time, because they're just wasting their time.
And many times we do find spiritual mediums who will tie themselves to people on the other side, and it does slow their spiritual growth.
Yes, it does. But I think that these people who are taping voices now and people who are doing automatic writing, so many people from just every walk of life is doing that. And I think that's because the veil is getting thinner between the two worlds, because we are coming into the Aquarian age. We are at the end of this millennium. There's like all these different changes happening on different levels. And so more and more people are tuning in to get information from those on the inner, those who are deceased.
And it's confirmation for those on the inner and for those of us here that those on the inner are willing to help us and want to help us.
Right, and they do want to help. And they're always positive in their approach. And sometimes, like those people who are inhabiting this woman's home surreptitiously, well, they're just earthbound and they don't know any better. And there's a group called American Association for Electronic Voice Phenomena, and there's a lot of members of that group, and many of them have been able to tape information. And they tape the discarnates who are in their home or wherever, in their office or wherever they are, and they're able to give that information out. And I think that's an exciting aspect.
The entire idea of spiritual psychic science is exciting and dynamic, and over the last few minutes we've been sharing with you a lot of ideas and thoughts about the spiritual dimension of psychic science, and we hope that it has helped you to better understand the fact that this is a spiritual truth and a belief system that can help and touch many lives. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within.